Well, good morning. Welcome to New Life. Thank you so much for choosing to spend part of your Sunday morning with us. We know we say this all the time, but some of you have never heard it, and you're not going to hear it now. I'm going to wait a minute. No, some of you have never heard it before. We know there are other places you could be, other things you could be doing this morning. You chose to be here with us. We just don't ever take that for granted, so thank you so much for being with us this Sunday. As Pam said in our welcome, we are in the middle of a very long series of messages called the Jesus Project. The Jesus Project is a 3-year attempt on our part to see and hear everything that Jesus said and everything that Jesus did as recorded in the 4 Gospels, and to allow ourselves to sort of maybe strip away some of our preconceived ideas about who Jesus is, what Jesus said and did, and allow him to speak for himself. We feel like that's the best way for us as we're trying to follow Jesus. To do that is to get rid of some of those ideas that maybe you grew up with, that I grew up with, that some pastor, priest, parent somewhere gave you about who Jesus is. And some of it was good stuff, and some of it was not so good stuff. And we have to recognize that. We got to get rid of the not so good stuff so that we can hold on to the stuff that is true and is genuine to who Jesus is. And so that's our goal with this series. So we are, again, just maybe 8 months into it, something like that. So we got a long way to go. We're not anywhere near finishing. Last week, Steve had the message he shared from John chapter 3. We're going to be back in John's gospel again this morning and next week as we kind of find the next story in that Jesus story here in John chapter 4. That's where we will be this morning. Most of you guys recognize that your bodies, well, whether you recognize it or not, your bodies are perfectly, in God's wisdom and in God's goodness, they are perfectly designed to live in a state of what we would call homeostasis. If you were a biologist, I'm not one, but I play one on TV, and I looked it up as I was prepping for the message. What that means is this, right? Like your bodies are meant to live in a state where everything stays balanced. Your cells are meant to stay balanced. The systems in your body are meant to stay balanced. Everything about your body is meant to stay in a regulated state so that for the most part, apart from disease and sickness and those sorts of things, your body will continue to function the way that your body is meant to function. That is a huge part of what it means for us to be human. And your body tells you when it is becoming dysregulated. And what I mean by that is this: if you need food, if your body needs food to sustain itself, it will tell you that it needs food at some point. Now, some of us, we like to eat even if our body doesn't tell us that we need it, but we like to eat it anyway, and it tastes good, so we eat it. But if you were just to, sort of just only eat when your body tells you, I'm actually hungry, not when I'm bored, not when I'm tired, not when I'm watching TV, whatever it is, when my body actually tells me it's time because it's sending the signal through my brain that I need to eat, then we would eat and we would find ourselves, we would regulate our bodies. Your body tells you when it is thirsty, when it needs water. You feel like, now that I just said it, you probably need a little bit. Like, I feel like I need a little bit of water. Your body, when you need sleep, tells you that you are tired, and then you hopefully go into your room and you turn off your phone and you don't do the blue light stuff and all those good things that would be better for you if we got better sleep, because your body is meant to live in this regulated state. And the reality is, like, most of the stuff that we do to keep our bodies regulated is not all that exciting. Is it? Like, most of the time, most of the meals that you have ever eaten in your life, and literally, if you're my age, you have literally eaten tens of thousands of meals by this point in your life. How many of them do you actually remember? I mean, there's probably been some memorable meals, some memorable moments. Some of you can't remember what you ate for breakfast this morning because it was so boring and mundane, or you should have eaten breakfast before you came, but whatever, we'll leave that for a different time. Just most of your meals are a turkey sandwich with a little bit of cheese on a Wednesday afternoon that is completely non-memorable. Most of the times that you've had a drink of water when your body needed it, it was not memorable. But there have probably been some moments where after a hard workout or a hard day's work in your yard, you felt like I can drink all of the water in my faucet this moment. There have been some moments, most of the time, that you have fallen asleep and you just fall asleep. It's not like, oh, I can't wait to go to sleep. And then there are those days, right, where you're like, I just can't wait to go to sleep. That's my Sunday afternoon nap for me, but we're not going to get there yet. I'm not going to take a nap yet. There is this piece of us as human beings that's meant to live in a regulated state. Our bodies send to us regular signals that we need to take care of ourselves in order to make sure that we continue to function like we're supposed to. And you know that you can ignore those signals for a period of time. You can ignore the signals that you're hungry. You can ignore the signals that you're tired. You can ignore the signals that you are thirsty. But if you ignore those signals long enough, you will find yourself in trouble. You will find yourself in a place where your body starts to actually work against itself. And your body is no longer working the way that it's supposed to because you have ignored the signals that your body gives you that says, hey, let's make sure we regulate ourselves. Let's make sure we take care of all of our needs. Even if it's a turkey sandwich on a Wednesday afternoon, it's not an exciting meal, but you need to eat in order to continue to function. Even if it's just the glass of water like at 4 o'clock in the middle of the afternoon because your body is thirsty, it's not exciting, it's not dramatic, but it's completely necessary for you to continue to function. But if you ignore those signals long enough, you will find yourself in a really difficult spot. Our bodies are really good at giving us signals when they need something. And our souls are also really good at giving us signals when we need things. And we're just better at ignoring those signals than we are at ignoring the signals that our body gives us. There are these less immediate, less pressing needs that we as human beings have that we can't quite put our finger on. It doesn't, it's not like a growl in your stomach. It's not that parched feeling in the back of your throat that says that you need water. It's not that completely exhausted feeling that says, I just need to fall asleep, rest, recover, and come back to this the next day. Our souls tend to give us these signals, and we, because they don't feel so immediate to us, we are really good at ignoring the signals that our souls give us, that our soul needs to be regulated, that our heart, our inner being, the person that we are underneath the surface of our lives actually needs some care, needs some attention to be paid to it, to be given to it in order for us to be healthy, functioning human beings. And so we live in a world where, for the most part, we have learned how to regulate our bodies, but we live in a world of dysregulated souls. We live in a world where, for the most part, we go through our lives not paying much attention to the needs and concerns of our heart and our soul because they're less apparent, they seem less significant to us in the moment, and we feel like we can get what our heart and our soul needs sometimes in the other ways. We don't need to satisfy the desire of our soul. We just need another relationship, and that will satisfy. We don't need to satisfy the heart and soul. We just need another drink, and that will satisfy. We don't need to satisfy our heart and our soul. We just need to throw ourselves more into our work. And if we throw ourselves more into our work and gain status and significance from that place, then that will eventually take care of the thing that's kind of eating at us from the inside. And we end up living in a world where we have regulated our bodies and we have allowed our souls to become incredibly dysregulated. And as we try to meet those needs in other ways, it's as ridiculous, if you think about it, as saying, I am thirsty, and then trying to go find a warm blanket to snuggle up in because your body thinks you're cold. You're not cold, you're thirsty. If you are thirsty, you need to drink water. You don't need to go to sleep. If you're hungry, you need to eat food. You don't need to go to sleep. If you are sleepy and tired, you don't need to eat in order to meet the need. You need to sleep. Your body is meant to regulate itself. Your soul is meant to regulate itself. And we're going to talk this morning about what it looks like for us to live our lives in a way where our souls are actually regulated, where we are living in balance with ourselves as human beings, the way that God intended for us to live. And we're going to be in John chapter 4, and we're going to start here. Now, when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, Steve kind of covered a little bit of that passage last week, and we're just kind of throwing it back there. Jesus understands that these Pharisees are learning that this is what's going on, even though Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples. He left Judea and departed again for Galilee, and he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well, and it was about the 6th hour. Now, that's 6 verses of content that require some explanation for us, and so we're going to actually park here for just a couple minutes. We're going to kind of talk through what's happening in this passage. So Jesus is in Jerusalem, which is kind of mid-southern part of the nation of Israel. He's in the capital city area of Jerusalem, kind of doing some ministry stuff there. That's where he had the conversation with Nicodemus. That's where most likely he was baptizing, and other people are learning that he's baptizing in that conversation that John the Baptist had with his disciples that Steve covered last week was all happening in that area. And now Jesus decides that it's time for him to go back from Jerusalem, Judea, that area, that capital city area, go up into the northern part of Israel, back home to Galilee, back to that region. And John says that when he decides to go back home from Jerusalem to Galilee, he decides to go through an area called Samaria. Now, this is significant, and the reason that John puts it in here is because this is not normal. If you were a good, observant Jew who had to go from Jerusalem to Judea, you would not go the short way through Samaria, which was the easiest way to get home. You would go the harder, more difficult, and longer way to get home because you didn't like the people who lived in Samaria. That's how serious you were about this thing. You would go across the Jordan River, you would cross up, through the northern part of Jordan, and then you would cross back over into the region in your home area because you did not want to take the shortcut through Samaria because the people in Samaria were not your kind of people. And when I say they were not your kind of people, again, we need to do a little bit of context here. We need to do a little bit of digging. So we're going to go way back. We're going to go back to about 975 years before this event takes place. And in about 975 BC, the nation of Israel has been ruled first by David and then has been ruled by David's son Solomon. And then Solomon's son, Rehoboam, should be the next king over all of these 12 tribes of Israel. Rehoboam is kind of an idiot. Solomon was wise, Rehoboam not so wise. And he listens to some bad advice, and he decides to the northern tribes, the 10 tribes up in northern Israel say to Rehoboam, we don't want to pay all these taxes that you're making us pay, and we're sort of not getting as much for our money as the rest of you guys down here. And he listens to some bad advice, and he says, well, I'm going to make life worse for you. And they say, well, we're not going to be part of your kingdom anymore. And they separate from the 2 tribes in the south. And so these 12 tribes, this one nation, 12 tribes, splits. They have a civil war, essentially, we could call it that. A civil war. 2 tribes stay in the south. The other 10 tribes separate themselves into this northern kingdom. When they separate out, they do what you do when you separate out from a kingdom. You create a new capital city. Does this sound familiar, from our history? Create a new capital city, and you create a new system of worship, and they built a new temple outside of Jerusalem up in a city called Samaria. And so this nation, this northern nation, living up, separated from their people, with a capital and a temple and its own king and its own sort of religious and political and social life, they live on for a few hundred years before they are captured by another kingdom in the north called Assyria. And this kingdom comes, wipes them all out, takes them away out of their land, and then eventually decides, well, we need to repopulate that land. We can't just let it, kind of live there. It would be good for us as a kingdom if we have people inhabiting that land. They send some of the Jewish people back into their land. They mix them all together with all of the other nations around them, and they have babies and wives and kids and all that sort of stuff, and they become what the good Jews in the southern part of the kingdom would call sort of half-breeds. Really not very nice to these Samaritans. That's the context in which this story takes place. I know it's 1,000 years before it, but it's important for us to understand why Jesus goes through Samaria and why this actually matters enough for John to even tell us this story. Jesus should not go through Samaria. And John says he felt compelled to go through this area, back to his home, back through this land where he and his people with him do not get along with them and their people with them. That's the context in which the rest of the story takes place. A woman from Samaria came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." You shouldn't do this, Jesus. For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. And the Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans." This is not what you're supposed to do, Jesus. If you happen to be traveling through Samaria, because it's the only way that you can get through, you certainly should not sit down and have a conversation with a woman next to the well outside the village while you're by yourself and your disciples have gone into the village to buy food. You should not be having this conversation. And Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." And the woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with." I don't know, I hate to bring this back to your attention, but you're the one who asked me for a drink. "You have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where do you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." And Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." And the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." This conversation between Jesus and this Samaritan woman goes sideways almost from the beginning, because she's a little bit defensive. She doesn't like the Jewish people. She doesn't probably like being treated like a second-rate, second-class citizen by other people who are inhabiting her land. And she definitely doesn't like being treated like a second-class citizen by people who are traveling through to get home, to their village and their land. And she says, we shouldn't even be having this conversation. You shouldn't even be asking me. You should wait for somebody else to come along who's like you, and you should ask him or you should ask her to get you some water. But we shouldn't be talking, because I know what you think of me as a Jewish person. You don't think I'm worth anything. You think I'm an enemy inside of your land. You think that I'm part of the reason that God isn't coming to rescue his people is because of people like me. And Jesus says, well, actually, you may have this wrong. If you knew who it was that was asking you for a drink, you would have asked me for a drink. And when you asked me for a drink, I would have not just met the need of your body in this moment that brings you out here to the well to draw the water, but I would have met that deeper need that's inside your soul, that thing that you can't seem to fix, that part of you that you can't seem to regulate, that part of you that is longing for connection in a deeper soul level spiritual way, I would have met that need. I would have given to you the kind of water that would satisfy you once and for all so that you would never be thirsty again. You would never feel that longing again. You would never experience that absolute, utter desperation again. And she misunderstands Jesus, and I don't know if she's being intentionally just kind of difficult with him or if she just doesn't get it. And sometimes we find this in the conversations with Jesus, that sometimes it feels like people intentionally don't get what he's saying, and sometimes it just feels like they're just lost. Like, what are you talking about? I was talking about the water in the well, and now you're talking about something completely different. I sympathize with people when Jesus does this to them, because I think I would have been just as confused and just as lost as they were. Where are you going to get this water from, she asks. The well is deep. You don't have anything to draw from. We've already established this. Where are you going to get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? Jacob dug this well a couple of 1,000 years ago, gave us this well. It has been producing water for us and our community and our village for thousands of years. Are you somehow greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well that has provided for us for thousands of years? Where are you going to come up with this living water if you don't have anything to draw with? And Jesus, looks at her and says this: everyone who drinks from this water is going to be thirsty again. This is what she knows, right? She knows that tomorrow she will have to leave her house in the village. She will have to walk out to the well again. She'll have to let down the bucket, fill the water, take it back to the village, and use it to drink and to wash and cook and all the things that she would have needed it for. And then guess what's going to happen the next day? It's going to be the same thing again. And then the next day, you know what? You have to do it again. And again, and Wednesday, Thursday, and it's a turkey sandwich on Thursday afternoon after you had one on Wednesday afternoon, and it's nothing exciting at all. And Jesus says, there is a life that quenches the thirst of your soul. That what you are actually looking for isn't just this water. You're going to need this water for the rest of your life. But I can provide to you what your soul is actually longing for, what your soul deeply desires. I can provide for you the kind of life that would not be a turkey sandwich on a Thursday afternoon. That would be like that meal that you've had that one time at that one restaurant where the steak was like melting in your mouth, and you still, as I'm talking about it, you can still remember what it tasted like. Jesus says, I can do that for you so that you don't ever have to come back over and over and over again, trying to satisfy the desires of your soul in all of these other ways that will never satisfy you. All of these other ways that will never completely quench the thirst of your soul. There is a living water that I can give to you, and if you would drink from the living water that I give to you, I promise you, you will never be thirsty again. And really what Jesus is doing is I think so many times, he draws on all of these little Old Testament spots, these allusions to these prophets who have spoken before of the time that was going to come, that God would rescue and redeem his people, that God would satisfy their thirst, that God would quench the desires of their hearts and their souls. And I think in the background of this one image that Jesus uses with the Samaritan woman by the well is this one place in Isaiah chapter 55. And we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, where Isaiah looks forward into the future and says, God is going to come and rescue his people someday. And when that moment comes, when that age to come rushes into this world here and now, these are the kinds of things that you can expect to happen. These are the kind of things that you will hear God saying to you, his people. Come, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. And he who has no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Why do you, why do I, why do we spend all of our money on the things that aren't really satisfying? Why do we spend so much? This is Jesus asking this woman. I think he's drawing on this picture. This is God saying to his people, why are you so concerned with all of the things that will never satisfy the longing of your heart and your soul? Why are you so concerned? Why are you so caught up? Why are you so wrapped up with all of this stuff? If you knew who it was that stood in front of you and offered to you living water without price, that offered to you the opportunity to satisfy the longing of your soul, why would you choose to keep spending yourself in pursuit of those things that don't satisfy? Here's why I say that this is what Jesus has in mind as the story continues. Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come here." And the woman answered him, "I have no husband." And Jesus said to her, "You're right in saying, I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one that you now have is not your husband. What you said is true." And the woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet." I'm getting something that you know, some things about me that you should not know about me. "Our fathers worshipped on this mountain." Let's divert ourselves from that story, right? This is what we do. Aren't we good at this? I don't want to talk about that. That's very personal. "Our fathers worshipped on this mountain when we separated from those tribes and we created our own temple. But you say that Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. I am going to make all of that stuff irrelevant. I'm going to tell a completely different story where none of that stuff matters anymore. You worship what you don't know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Those who recognize their deep need for God will find that he satisfies the longing of their soul. Those who recognize that they're not just thirsty for a drink of water that you're going to need to go back and get from the well again the next day and the next day and the next day. Those who recognize that they are longing for something more than that will find that God satisfies the longing of their soul, not with stuff in a temporary well that no matter how long it lasts and no matter how good it is, no matter how clean the water is still never going to finally satisfy you. That he would give to us living water that can't be contained in a well or a cistern, and that provides for you the kind of life that truly satisfies. And I think with all of that in the background, Jesus looking at the woman and saying, this is what you need. This is what you are looking for in all of the wrong places. This is what you're trying to find in every possible way that you can satisfy the thirst of your soul. And nothing works. Or it works for a little while and then it stops working. And when it stops working, we got to find something else to replace it. And Jesus says, living water isn't held in temporary cisterns. Living water lives in living, breathing people like you and me. You can't find it in a temple. You can't find it in a sacrifice. You can't find it in a relationship. You can't find it in a career. You can't find it in a bottle. You can't find it in any of the other ways that we choose to pursue satisfaction and the desires of our soul. Living water can't be held in any of those things that are going to fall apart when this world falls apart, will fall apart at some point in your life. Living water lives in a living cistern, a living well. Living water lives inside of you when you open up and allow Jesus to satisfy the longing of your soul. The woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming. She tries one last time. I know that the Messiah is coming someday in the future. Jesus, let's put off this conversation. We'll just push it down the road a little bit. Someday the Messiah is going to come. And when he comes, he will answer all of these questions. He will tell us all things. He will resolve all of our disputes. He will answer all of my questions, all of your questions, all the Samaritan questions, all the Jewish questions. The Messiah, when he shows up, is going to solve all of this stuff. And when he shows up, he will bring with him that moment in which God says to his people, come to me, all of you who are thirsty. When he shows up, he will say, why are you spending your life and your money on things that don't actually satisfy? And Jesus said to her, I'm here. I who speak to you am he. Jesus is the living water. That's what he is. And when he looks at this woman, with all of her seeking, with all of her searching, with all of her chasing, says, you have run everywhere that you possibly can. And you still can't quench the desire of your soul. I'm here to tell you that I would give you a drink of the kind of water that will change your life, not just today, but for the rest of eternity. That's why I'm here. And I would suggest that when John told the story about Jesus having to go through Samaria, it wasn't because it was the quickest way. It was because this woman needs to hear Jesus say to her, I who speak to you am he. It's because this woman needs to know that there is a way to quench the thirst of your soul that cannot be found in any of the temporary cisterns that we live with in this world. And I think that Jesus went all of this way, and this is something we should recognize. Jesus went all of this way for one conversation. You think Jesus is the greatest person who ever came on the planet, whatever you think about Jesus, all the things that we say about him. Jesus came to change the world. We're still talking about Jesus 2,000 years later. I think all that stuff is true. But one of the most remarkable things that you find about Jesus is stories like this, where it's not Jesus changed the world, it's Jesus changed her world. Jesus shows up at her well, sits down, has a conversation with her, and says, come to me if you're thirsty, and I'll give you a drink from the life-changing living water. Come to me. Stop spending all of your life and your money and your things on the stuff that will not satisfy you, and instead find that I can give you life. That is a life-changing moment for this woman. We'll see. We're going to leave it there. I'm going to leave you in the middle of the story. I'm not going to tell you how she responded, but I'm going to let you think about how you would respond. If Jesus were to show up and say to you, I could change everything for you, if you are willing to admit that you are that needy, if you are willing to admit that you are longing in your soul for that living water that only He can give, and that maybe you and I have found, we have chased in all sorts of other ways. Jesus is, for us, living water. Satisfies what you can't satisfy in any other way. And I believe that when we genuinely open up to that, and He meets with us in that place, He changes us forever. From that moment forward, I mean, yeah, we still have to get thirsty and hungry, but we will never, never thirst again the way that we did when we came to Him. Would you pray with me this morning? Jesus, each of us are just at different places when it comes to where we are with you, what we think about you, what we think we know about you, what we've heard about you, what other people have told us about you. Jesus, I'm grateful that you are the kind of person who went out of your accustomed way to find one woman sitting by a well in a village filled with outsiders so that you could tell her that you were living water to satisfy her soul. Jesus, I know it sounds hard to believe, but I don't believe that any of us who are sitting here are here by accident. I believe that we're here because you have led us here to this place. And I believe that each of us is here because we needed to hear and be reminded of again this truth, that you are the satisfaction for our life and our soul. And that no matter how many other ways we have pursued it, no matter how many other ways we have chased it, none of them have satisfied us in the way that you do. So Jesus, we pray today that each of us in this moment would have open hearts, open soul, open spirit to hear what you say to us today, to receive again, or maybe for the first time, or the first time in a very long time, your grace and your forgiveness and your invitation to be changed. Jesus, it's in your name that we give ourselves back to you. And we ask that you would satisfy the longing of our soul. Amen.